at the Labour Party news conference, suggestions that there had been a secret deal, a secret pact with the Liberal Democrats with regard to the elections for the Scottish Parliament. That broadly the two parties would try and go for a pact. Now, Mr. Dewar says there may well have been informal contacts prior to the last general election between Labour and the Liberal Democrats. Indeed, there no doubt were, but it wasn't about the Scottish Parliament. People I've been talking to are saying the shape of the Scottish Parliament was unknown at that time, and Jim Wallace is dismissing the story as total rubbish and saying that his party has really gone hard on Labour. Indeed, only yesterday they were condemning Labour's record on spending. So I think that the two parties, for different reasons, are uniting in some senses to knock down this story. But it is the case. They may be doing that, but what do you think? It is the case, nonetheless, that Tony Blair and Paddy Ashton, particularly Tony Blair, for wider UK reasons, the reasons of the project, as he calls it, reshaping the ground of the centre-left, Tony Blair, I'm sure, would be extremely happy if there has to be a coalition, to see that coalition with the Liberal Democrats. Donald Dewar naturally doesn't want one at all, and Jim Wallace, for now, again, for very, very good strategic reasons, wants to make it apparent that his options are open. And what have the Conservatives been up to today? The Conservatives were pouncing upon this prospect, but also they are this afternoon unveiling their own plans regarding tuition fees. The Tories announced earlier this week that if they come to power in the Scottish Parliament, their very first bill would be the abolition of tuition fees. This afternoon, with a certain confidence, it has to be said, perhaps beyond their electoral prospects, they are publishing in outline that bill. Good luck to them. It shows a bit of spirit. Brian Tennant, for the moment, thank you. And we can now go over live to Westminster and our parliamentary correspondent, David Porter. David.
Jackie, thank you very much. And we've just started Scottish Questions with a question from David Stewart. It's on screening for diabetes. It's being answered by the Health Minister, Sam Galbraith.
I hope that the committee will be able to make recommendations to ministers by the end of this year. From the 1st of July 1999, this will be a matter for the Scottish Parliament.
Mr. Stewart.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Can I thank my honourable friend for his helpful reply? The Minister will be aware that diabetes is the main reason for blindness of those who are under 65. It contributes to half of the lower limb amputations within Scotland, and in the UK as a whole consumes over £2 billion worth of NHS resources. Does the Minister share the view of the British and American Diabetic Association, who have argued for a focused screening approach towards diabetes to protect the high-risk groups, those over 40, those with a family history, and those who are overweight? And finally, does the Minister share my view that action at an early intervention stage is vitally important to fight what's been described as Scotland's silent killer?
Well, I'd first of all like to recognise once again my honourable friend's interest in this matter and the tremendous contribution that he's made to this debate and to the benefit of all those involved. I don't want to sort of prejudge the conclusions of the screening committee, but I do think it is important that we tackle the serious complications of this disease, and we do that in many cases by making the diagnosis early. As he knows, we're committed to the St Vincent Declaration to cut by a third end-stage renal failure due to diabetes, diabetic retinopathy and blindness due to it, and to cut by half limb amputations due to peripheral vascular disease. I think that's a good package, and honourable members to be congratulated for partly being responsible for pushing this issue for so long.
John Maxton.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the Consultative Steering Group on the Scottish Parliament held its final meeting on 12th March. I have written to the Secretary of State outlining the group's further recommendations on the matter considered, including recommendations on the code of conduct for members of the Scottish Parliament and the relationship between the Parliament and the media.
Mr. Maxton.
Speaker, could I firstly just take an opportunity to congratulate my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, as this is his last Scottish Question Time, on the sterling work he's done over the past year. And in particular, of course, for the establishment of a Scottish Parliament and for the victory which he and the party are going to win on May the 6th. Can I also congratulate my honourable friend for the work the Consultative Steering Group have done in looking forward to a new democratic open parliament for the 21st century, rather than looking back, like some people do, to some mythical parliament of 1707. And can I also, would he agree with me that the innovative use of new technology that has been proposed for the parliament, including electronic voting, should set an example that this place would do well to follow? Surely my honourable friend would agree that if if it is possible to introduce electronic voting in a building as old as this one that is for temporary use, then it should be possible here as well.
John Maxton
Madam
from the
Speaker, I think I
Glasgow
can agree with
Cathcart
everything
MP
that
there,
my honourable
making
friend
some
said
political points
to
in
the
this
House
question. Henry
this
McLeish
afternoon.
answering that question.
This is a parliament fit for an information age. It will have new technology, and of course in the longer term, Madam Speaker, it may influence other institutions in the United Kingdom. But I think it would be important also to say that on May the 1st, 1997, we voted in the United Kingdom for a parliament. On September the 11th in Scotland, we voted for a parliament. On May the 6th, the Labour government will deliver a Scottish parliament to the Scottish people.
Mr. Sweeney.
Madam Speaker, what implications are there, can I ask the Minister, for the cross-party consensus that has underpinned the work of the Consultative Steering Group of today's revelations that secret deals have been struck in London to carve up the Scottish Parliament? Is this not further evidence that Scotland's Parliament under New Labour would be just Scotland's Parliament taking London's orders, and in fact what Scotland needs is a Parliament run by Scotland's party delivering for the people of Scotland?
A reference from John Swinney there to some reports that Labour and the Liberal Democrats have been in talks about a deal for the Holyrood Parliament.
Reflected a party that it is not doing well in the current election campaign in Scotland. What I would like to say is this: we did have an all-party consensus for the work of the Consultative Steering Group. That, I think, should be welcomed on every side of the House. But I think it's also true to say that it is a contempt of the Scottish people to suggest that one party is Scotland's party. Scotland will find out on May the 6th who the party is that Scotland wants to deliver the Parliament. I'm in no doubt that the Labour Party will be delivered in those elections.
Mr. Oliver Letwin.
Conservative.
Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, perhaps I ought to begin by apologising for not congratulating the Secretary of State for anything at all much. I wonder whether the Minister could tell us whether he's explained to the Consultative Steering Group why there is no provision for recounts at regional level in the Scottish elections.
Madam Speaker, my honourable friends from Senate position suggesting we might not need them. It is simply the case that this has been explained to the Conservatives who did not address the issues when they were raised, that this is a sensible, straightforward. You simply cannot have the recount that they envisage when you're dealing with an additional member system. More to the point, Madam Speaker, that this will be an election which will be fought hard by the Scottish people on May the 6th. We have no doubt that they will be taking this seriously, and it is high time that if the Conservatives in Scotland are taking this seriously, so should the Conservatives in this House.
Mr. Peter Viggers.
Before, Madam Speaker.
And this is a question on the impact of the minimum wage in the
That
Scottish
the national
economy.
minimum wage will benefit 2 million workers in Britain as a whole and 157,000 in Scotland. The Low Pay Commission have statutory responsibility for monitoring and evaluating the introduction and impact of the wage and are expected to report to the Government on this in December 1999.
Mr. Viggers.
What is the government's answer to the extra unemployment, estimated at 10,000, that will be caused in Scotland by the minimum wage? Is it welfare to work, which will use public money to subsidise people back into employment?
Well, I don't recognise the honourable gentleman's estimate. What I do know is that the claimant count in Scotland now is the lowest since 1976, and I think that is an achievement by this government that people in Scotland are now widely recognising. The national minimum wage, of course, is an important part of the government's strategy to target poverty and to achieve a fairer society in Scotland, and we will continue to develop and build on those policies.
Tom Clark.
Madam Speaker, is my honourable friend aware that the Scottish people are extremely proud that in delivering the minimum wage, among many of our other promises, they're particularly pleased that the Labour Party did it in the face of opposition from the Conservatives and when the SNP seemed to be tucked up in bed? Will they take the tourist industry as an example, where they were represented on the independent commission which made recommendations to the government? And will they accept that far from that industry and many others deploring minimum wages, they welcome it because they want a well-trained, well-motivated, well-paid staff consistent with the Scottish tradition of fairness, decency and a refusal to exploit people who seek to serve us?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. The national minimum wage was a landmark achievement by the government in its bid to create a fairer society in Scotland. It was achieved against the opposition, of course, of the Conservatives opposite, and it's regrettable that the SNP didn't even bother to turn up to vote for the national minimum wage, which delivered such benefits to many people on low incomes in Scotland.
Some more.
Madam Speaker, while agreeing with the Minister that the minimum wage is a very important development for Scotland, does he accept that the 14,000 job losses that there have been in Scotland since the general election is a really damning indictment of the government's record, and that with so much of Scotland's economy dependent on exports, an early commitment to the single currency is absolutely essential for the country?
I certainly don't want to minimise the impact of any job loss upon families and individuals concerned, but I think the honourable gentleman and his party ought to recognise that there has been a net gain in jobs in Scotland since the last election. And as I said, that unemployment in Scotland now is at the lowest rate since 1976, and that is a real and a significant achievement, and all credit to that is due to the efforts and the economic policies followed by this government.
Mr. Gavin Strand.
Will the Minister agree that it's a disgrace that under the Tories so many Scots work for poverty pay? Will he confirm that 157,000 Scottish employees will benefit from the statutory national minimum wage? A minimum wage which, complemented with the Working Families Tax Credit, the 10p income tax rate and the reduction in national insurance contributions, will help to ensure that work pays.
My honourable friend is absolutely right that the national minimum wage is only part of our strategy to tackle poverty. Taken together, for example, with things like the Working Families Tax Credit, which he mentioned, it means that the effective minimum wage for, say, a single earner with 2 children is not £3.60 but £7 an hour, which is a very important contribution to tackling poverty amongst low-earning families.
Dr. Lear Fox.
Madam Speaker, the government's own figures on the Scottish economy show unemployment rising by 1,200 last month. It shows there are 16,000 fewer jobs in Scotland than there were a year ago. Why should it be that the rise in unemployment in Scotland should account for half of the rise of the UK as a whole? Why should the Scottish economy be performing so badly in comparison to the rest of the United Kingdom? And what measures will the Minister take to deal with the special problems which seem to be afflicting the Scottish economy under Labour management?
Well, the claimant count last month was 5.6%, which was for March. That was exactly the same as it was for February. So the percentage rate is exactly the same. And as I said, that is the lowest since 1976, which is a huge achievement by this government. And there have been particularly big reductions, of course, in youth unemployment and in long-term unemployed as well. We're not complacent about these achievements. We intend to continue to build on these in the future.
Mr. Tambiel.
And this is a question about the trial of the 2 Lockerbie suspects currently being held in the Netherlands.
While no such representations have been received from the Dutch legal authorities, my right honourable, noble and learned friend and I have been very pleased with the constructive cooperation of the Dutch legal authorities in ensuring the orderly and secure handover of the 2 Libyan accused to the Scottish authorities in the Netherlands.
Has the Lord Advocate followed accepted good prosecution practice by making provisional lists of Crown witnesses and productions available to the defence in advance of service of the indictment? If he has not already done so, does he intend to do so in the near future? And if he doesn't so intend, what are his reasons?
Madam Speaker, the Crown Office has already supplied to the defence a provisional list of witnesses listing a substantial number of the witnesses who might be cited to give evidence at the trial. In addition to this, a large number of copy documentary productions which might be adduced in evidence at the trial has also been offered to the defence. Further provisional lists of witnesses and copy productions will be made available to the defence in due course in the discharge of the prosecution's duty to provide such material. This matter, Madam Speaker, is now sub judice.
Mr. Mingus Campbell.
Can the Minister give the House an estimate of what he understands to be the likely charge in respect of both the actual trial itself and the charge to the Legal Aid Fund from public funds? Both the trial itself and the likely level of legal aid support will be very substantially greater than normal. Are these sums to be met out of the usual Scottish Office vote, or has a special arrangement been made with the Treasury? Madam Speaker, I cannot give the honourable gentleman specific details of the amount of funds involved, but I certainly would wish to do that and pass them on to the honourable gentleman. All I can say in secondary in terms of the sourcing of that these will come from sources within the legal aid budget, but obviously we want to look very carefully indeed at the extent of the legal aid involved in such a case.
Mrs. Rosemary McKenna.
And this is a question about apprenticeships.
The government set a target of 15,000 modern apprenticeships by 2002 in the lifelong learning paper Opportunity Scotland, published in September 1998. There are currently 10,500 modern apprentices in training, and 67 modern apprenticeship frameworks have been approved in Scotland. Of course, from 1st July 1998, this will be a matter for the Scottish Parliament.
Mrs. McKenna.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that we should be celebrating the impact that modern apprenticeships and New Deal are having on many thousands of young Scots? Can he tell us what proposals and what plans he has for modern apprenticeships under the Scottish Parliament, of which he will be the First Minister?
Well, thank you. I never anticipate events. I'm a cautious man. And I'm not sure that it is right for me to speculate about what that Parliament may do in this House, Madam Speaker. But it will not... Those, however, who read carefully the public prints will know that the figure of 20,000 as a target for modern apprenticeships has been mooted, and it seems to me to be a very splendid idea. I agree with her, and I think it is important that we remember not only that we must expand higher and further education, but we must expand skills in other parts of the economy if we are to compete effectively. And I believe that modern apprenticeships have been a real success as part of the Skill Seekers programme, and that there is very widespread support for the expansion of this particular provision.
Mr. Wood.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Given that the New Deal has so far managed to fail 60% of those participating, and given the Secretary of State's appalling and abysmal record on job creation, where 7,000 jobs were lost last year in Scotland and 16,000 in the first year in Scotland, wouldn't it be better, rather than pushing yet another hopeless scheme of apprenticeships, that the Secretary of State recognise that with over 2,500 extra regulations, 3.5 billion of extra taxes, that the government got out of businesses' hair and let them actually run and create real jobs?
Sean Woodward, the Conservative MP for Witney in
Oxfordshire. I fear the honourable member, poor soul, has been listening to the Scottish Conservatives, and that's a great mistake on these matters. Can I say to him that I don't recognise his figures, and to make a very serious point, I think that the New Deal has been a quite remarkable success. It has had widespread support from employers in Scotland, not initial support that has tailed off, but support that in fact has been maintained and has grown over the months. And we have seen a very remarkable impact on the unemployment rate for the 18 to 24-year-olds, which has been halved, literally halved, over this period. Of course there will be failures. The client group has a difficult record, or they wouldn't actually be in the position where they would be in the New Deal. But a flexible gateway, the dedication and the positive approach of the employment service, the cooperation of employers and the voluntary sector has, I think, produced very real benefits and gains for Scotland. And can I finish just by saying to the honourable gentleman that if he likes to go back to the record of the Labour government over the period since we came to office, he will see that the numbers in employment in Scotland are up by about 17,000, and the number who are unemployed is down by 35,000. Now, I recognise difficulties. I recognise that there are areas of the economy that are having real and genuine problems. But it's not helped by a kind of Greek chorus of misery from the Conservative benches, which I don't think really can be excused with the fact that the honourable gentleman isn't very often seen in Scotland.
Mr. Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My right honourable friend will be aware that many young people in Scotland have been cynical about previous Tory schemes. Does my right honourable friend share my sense of concern and the young constituents of Eastwood at the way in which the SNP have sought to exploit that concern and cynicism by undermining the New Deal? It is undoubted the New Deal has been a success, and will my right honourable friend give an assurance to the House today that in his drive to increase the skill level and give new opportunities to young people in Scotland, that the New Deal will not be replaced by modern apprenticeships, but indeed the New Deal and the modern apprenticeships vision will work in tandem to unlock the potential of many thousands of young Scots?
Of course, I have no difficulty in agreeing with my honourable friend about that. There are some 38,500 school seekers in Scotland at the moment, and 72% of them are receiving a wage. I think school seekers as a concept has been a success, but it is absolutely right to say that we've got to work through school seekers and work on other ways and on other fronts, of which the New Deal is one, to try and get an interlocking pattern of provision to skill and encourage our people into the labour market, so that they can have the dignity and the wages, very importantly, that go with regular employment. I don't think I want to be too difficult about the cynicism of the SNP at the moment. I see that they are represented by one lonely outpost here today. And in case anyone says anything nasty about that from my side, I think we should have some consideration for people who are worried about their seats.
Archie Kirkwood.
Madam Speaker, would the Secretary of State, however, not acknowledge that the job increases that he's rightly adverted to have been mainly in the service sector and mainly part-time jobs? Does he acknowledge that there is a real contribution to manufacturing industry can be made through these modern apprenticeships? But will he give a guarantee that the sectoral industries, like textiles, for example, who can be assisted by these apprenticeships, are properly consulted? And will he look carefully at the German model, where there's a very close relationship between schools and industry and trade unions in developing what he can to assist manufacturing industry north of the border in future?
Well, I certainly take the honourable gentleman's point about the importance of the interface between school education, further education and industry itself. And of course he's right in saying that there have been problems in manufacturing industry, not, I think, unique to Scotland. And it was encouraging to see the last quarterly report of the Bank of Scotland suggesting that there were some signs of revival and improvement. But I have no doubt there will be disappointments before we get over the present difficulties. But the framework generally is encouraging. And certainly the very substantial import of financial services jobs, for example, that we were able to announce a few weeks ago, is important to us. But if the honourable member, and I'm sure he would, be fair about this, if he looks at the efforts that were made successfully, for example, to preserve the Longannet Deep Mine over the last few weeks, and if he looks at the efforts that have been made and the present difficulties in the shipbuilding industry, the work of Gavin Laird and his colleagues on the task force, I think he would be the last person, and I'd like to think he'd be one of the last people from those benches to accuse us of inattention or indifference to these difficulties.
Mr. Nigel Griffiths.
And this is the question about school building and refurbishment.
Question 8,
He's not
Madam
there for that one, so we're going on to question 8, which is a question
We
about
announced
higher
major
education.
steps to improve access to further and higher education last month. We challenged further education colleges to widen access to underrepresented groups, a challenge we are backing with over £100 million, which will create an additional 40,000 places for such students. In relation to higher education, we expect to spend £60 million in the next 3 years on measures to help widen access by students from less advantaged backgrounds, and in particular to assist low-income or disabled people to study part-time. From July the 1st this year, this will be a matter of the Scottish Parliament.
Madam Speaker, will the Minister agree with me that the previous system of funding further and higher education failed to reach the majority in our most deprived communities and to give them access to educational opportunity? Due to this government's introduction of the Scottish grant for widening access, and a partnership between Fife Council Community Services and Lauder College, I had the pleasure of opening a learning centre in High Valleyfield, a former mining community in my constituency, which has some of the highest levels of deprivation and unemployment in the area. 115 people since January have applied for courses, the range is being expanded, and some are looking at a community business. Will she join me in paying tribute to all involved, and will she agree with me that this is a step-by-step example of the government delivering lifelong learning and about giving people new skills, a greater belief in themselves and real hope for a better future.
I congratulate my honourable friend for her involvement in the High Valleyfield project. I visited a number of projects in Fife that testify to what my honourable friend says. This government is committed to widening access to those, especially those who are particularly disadvantaged. And indeed, in relation to higher education, and again in Fife there is a proud record of higher education, I have been talking to the Scottish Higher Education Funding Council to encourage them to examine means whereby premia could be paid to higher education institutions who make particular efforts to enlarge the number from disadvantaged communities who attend those institutions.
Dr. Liam Fox.
Madam Speaker, when 16 days before the last general election, the Prime Minister uttered the words, "Labour has no plans to introduce tuition fees for higher education," what did he mean?
The Prime Minister, prior to the last general election, was awaiting the result of the Deering Committee, which his government, the honourable gentleman's government, was responsible for setting up. And indeed, I deplore the scaremongering of parties opposite, trying to dissuade people from entering into applications for higher education institutions. Already we have seen last year a 4% increase in those going into higher education. There are already 2 applications for every higher education place in Scotland. And indeed, if I may say so, Madam Speaker, it is deplorable that there is one party in Scotland that is determined to ensure that those who are most disadvantaged in relation to information technology, those who don't have access to computers, have to give up that opportunity so that they can remove the tuition fees for those who are the wealthiest, those who come from families that earn more than £35,000 a year. That's what widening access is about.
Madam Speaker, with an ability to reinterpret political history in the way the Honourable Lady does, it's a pity she's become the invisible lady of the Scottish election campaign. The truth is that within a couple of months of the Prime Minister's words being uttered, he announced a £3,000 tax on learning and the abolition of the student maintenance grant. And in complete contrast to what the Honourable Lady has just told us, there's been a 12.8% reduction in the number of Scottish students applying to go to Scottish universities. The numbers are already going down, and after the betrayal of Scottish students, we cannot believe a word that this government says on education in advance of these elections.
Well, I'm delighted the honourable gentleman refers to me as the invisible lady. My diet must be working. But if I can say to the invisible man, whom we've not seen during the Scottish general election campaign, and indeed, given the fact that there are no Conservative members of Parliament in Scotland, I thought he might at least have been able to join in the collective apology from his colleagues in Scotland to the Scottish people for the policies of the previous government. 40% of those from low-income families pay no tuition fees at all, and only a minority pay the full tuition fees. And indeed, as a consequence of this government's policies, there will be more places in higher education in Scotland. It is our aim to have 750,000 young people in further and higher education in Scotland, a very considerable achievement over the record of the previous government.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Can I assume from the answers that my honourable friend's just given that this government will never consider benefiting better off tertiary education students by plundering millions of pounds from school children in general and divorcing them from computers, as proposed by the scarcely represented Scottish National Party?
Well, the honourable gentleman makes a very good point. It is no surprise that the Scottish National Party are so scarcely represented. It seems they're going to be even more scarcely represented in future. But if I can make the point to the honourable gentleman, I visited Clackmannan Primary School yesterday, where I saw primary 4 pupils working on computers as part of the Success Makers programme, an opportunity for those who perhaps, because of the lack of income of their parents, do not have access to information and communications technology. Indeed, that will be the skill that will be required for the 21st century. I'm aware that the Scottish National Party has a great affection for Scotland's history. I regret that they expect our children to live in Scotland's past.
Mr. Nicholas Winterton.
Number 9. This is a question about the future role of the Secretary of State for Scotland.
The role of the Secretary of State for Scotland after devolution was described in our White Paper, Scotland's Parliament. The Secretary of State will be expected to promote good communication between the governments and the 2 parliaments in Edinburgh and London, to represent Scottish interests in reserved matters within the United Kingdom Government and to exercise certain specific responsibilities under the Scotland Act.
Mr. Winterton.
I'm grateful, Madam Speaker, to the right honourable gentleman for that courteous reply. Would he not accept that devolution brings about a massive transfer of power from his department to the Scottish Parliament, not least in not least in such major areas of policy as agriculture, health and education, bearing in mind that this House will still make a major contribution through revenue support. Can the right honourable gentleman indicate how Scottish members of Parliament in the United Kingdom Parliament and this House will clearly monitor these matters?
Can I first of all congratulate the honourable member to going to the nub of the matter with uncharacteristic speed. He's absolutely right. It does, in fact, represent a massive transfer of power. That is the point of the exercise, and we're rather proud of it on this side of the House. He must also, and I'm sure he does recognise, that there is we believe, a logical and strong division of responsibility between Westminster and the devolved Parliament in Edinburgh. Each have their areas in which their writ runs. And that seems to me, and seems to those on our side of the argument, to be a sensible arrangement. Of course, there are important matters that remain here at Westminster. Fiscal matters are among them. And the Scottish members of Parliament who will represent Scottish interests in this House, I think, will not lose their tongues and will certainly not lose their interest in what is happening. And I suspect that these matters will be very closely and very properly scrutinised by them.
Miss Anne Begg.
Number 10, Madam Speaker.
And this is a question about support for the oil and gas industry.
The Government has set up the Oil and Gas Industry Task Force under the chairmanship of the Minister for Energy and Industry at the DTI to examine the key issues facing the industry and to produce recommendations for action by the summer. My noble friend Lord MacDonald, the Minister for Business and Industry at the Scottish Office, is Vice Chairman of the Task Force, and Scottish Office officials sit in the main Task Force group and on 3 of the working groups.
Ms. Begg.
I'm sure my right honourable friend will be very pleased to note that the people from the oil industry in Aberdeen with whom I've had contact are very pleased with the setting up of the Oil and Gas Task Force and are speaking very highly of the progress that has been made so far. Can my right honourable friend confirm to me that this Labour government will continue to give support to the oil industry, which after all is the major employer in my constituency, and not treat the oil industry as some kind of liquid plug in order to fill a gap in the finances of Scotland, which would be caused by the SNP's plans for divorce?
I'm very pleased to hear that the task force is being well received. It is, of course, working hard. It includes representatives both from industry and from the unions as well as the Scottish Office. It was set up in the context of a 25-year low in oil prices. The oil price is now rising, but it is very important that we continue to support the task force and enable the industry to compete in very tight international markets.
Mr. Ambrose.
I wonder if the honourable gentleman can explain what will happen to the DTI functions currently for the oil industry. He'll probably know that constituencies like mine, which actually has the largest oil field of any constituency anywhere in the European Union, actually rely on civil servants working in Aberdeen to decide on certain oil policy. Clearly this is a matter that may well be being devolved to the Scottish Parliament, but it would be interesting to know whether in fact we will have to go to the Scottish Parliament to get details of what's happening in the oil industry within Dorset.
And just to clear up a bit of confusion,
energy policy will be
he actually represents Dorset West, which has the biggest inland oil field in Britain.
Scottish Office and Westminster on this as on all other issues.
Marshall.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I was one of many Labour MPs who visited the Caverna-Govan shipyard last Friday and who all wholeheartedly supported the upbeat and optimistic presentation put forward by both management and shop stewards alike. Will the Minister agree with me that this excellent yard does indeed have a future? And can he tell us if the if the task force will be able to put any oil and gas work to Caverna in order to enable it to overcome its short-term difficulties?
Yes.
I'm very pleased to hear that my honourable friend and his Labour colleagues did visit the yard and talk to management and unions, and I'm sure that will be a boost to the morale in the yard. We have set up the task force to look at finding prospective buyers for the yard. The task force is working extremely hard, and I'm sure we wish it every success.
Sir Robertson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Whilst welcoming the task force and recognising that the industry is enjoying the work in the task force and recognising that it is a constructive operation at the moment, obviously the task force will be judged by its outcomes. But can the Minister assure us that whilst he said to the House that the oil price is rising, that the Chancellor has learnt his lesson of his first 2 years in power and will not see the rising oil price as an excuse to come back to look at the tax regime and to increase taxes on the oil industry?
Well, that's a matter for the Chancellor, but through the task force on the oil and gas industry, we will be looking at a range of issues and look at a number of measures, some of which are already being implemented to support and develop that industry.
Mr. Harry Cohen.
11, Madam Speaker.
And this is
Madam Speaker, the
about
term
male
rape does not exist in Scots criminal law. A man who forces another man to have non-consensual sexual intercourse with him would face charges of indecent assault and sodomy. The penalties for such offences are limited only by the court in which they are tried. That is up to life imprisonment for a case heard in the High Court. The needs of victims of sexual assault are increasingly recognised by the agencies in the criminal justice system who provide support as appropriate. And of course, Madam Speaker, from 1st July 1999, this will be a matter for the Scottish Parliament.
Mr. Cohen.
Grateful for the Minister for that reply. He wrote to me saying that male rape was a foreign concept in Scottish law, but if there's no recognised criminal offence, surely there's no point in reporting it. No official trauma counselling for the victim, no bringing to justice the perpetrator. Surely the law in England and Wales, where male rape is recognised as a specific criminal offence, is better than it is in Scotland in this regard.
Madam Speaker, I appreciate the contribution my honourable friend has made to the debate in England and Wales in terms of the 94 Act. But I would have to say, Madam Speaker, that there are areas covered by what I've just given to the House in terms of indecent assault and sodomy. So we believe in Scotland there are no need to change the current definitions, and we see flexibility involved in the common law of Scotland. But can I also say, Madam Speaker, that we're doing a great deal in relation to the victims of crime in Scotland right across the board. And also in terms of intimidated and vulnerable witnesses, I've just completed a consultation report on that particular issue. So I'd want to reassure my honourable friend that on both the question of the terms of the indecent assault and sodomy, these are covered, but we're also doing a great deal with victims and intimidated witnesses.
Dr. Julia Lewis.
Number 12, Madam Speaker.
My right honourable friend last met the Federation on 21st April. Economic and Monetary Union did not feature on that occasion, but the Federation is a member of the Scottish EMU Coordination Group, which is taking forward business preparation in Scotland for EMU. The group last met on 12th April. From 1st July, this will be a matter for the Scottish Parliament.
Dr. Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm very sorry to hear that Economic and Monetary Union didn't feature on the agenda of that last meeting. Had it done so, small businesses would have been able to inform the Secretary of State of their overwhelming opposition to the abolition of the pound and its replacement by the euro. And they might also have been able to draw to his attention the result of last month's ICM poll, which showed that whereas 30% of the population are in favour of EMU, 60% are against, a 2-to-1 majority, marking a 6% increase on the majority against for the same question with the same wording last October. Doesn't this show that the government is really wasting its time trying to brainwash people into abandoning our currency and merging our economy with that of the European continent?
Well, there are, of course, different views in the business community, but the honourable gentleman should know that the Scottish CBI, for example, have said that they support the principle of UK membership when the economic conditions are right, which reflects the government's position. What we are doing is preparing industry for that possibility of that decision. and the Small Business Federation is playing a constructive and positive part in these preparations.
Martin O'Neill.
Will my honourable friend agree that the way in which economic and monetary union will be attractive to Scottish businesses is when they are able to appreciate the full import of the competitiveness white paper, which has a range of opportunities and assistance for small business, and also the fact that small businesses depend in large measure on large businesses operating alongside them. And will he accept the congratulations from the small businesses in my constituency at the work done by the Secretary of State and the Minister and the Lords in smoothing the path to ensure the future continuance of coal mining at Longannet, and the multitude of jobs which will depend on that, both at the mine and in the industries and small businesses in West Fife and Clackmannanshire, which are so dependent upon it.
My honourable friend is absolutely right. The government is pursuing a range of measures to help small businesses, and certainly what they don't need at this time is, of course, a penny increase in the income tax, which would affect in a very severe way a lot of unincorporated small businesses.
Madam Speaker, is the honourable gentleman aware that whilst the polling evidence reveals that small businessmen are overwhelmingly against economic monetary union, they are nevertheless under a sense of its inevitability? In other words, they fear that people less intelligent and less informed than themselves may vote for it.
Well, the Federation of Small Businesses, of course, did put out a press release setting out their views, in which it said the FSB is not telling its members to ignore EMU and stick their heads in the sand and hope that it will go away. It won't. I think that's a piece of advice that the honourable gentleman could take on board.
Russell Brown.
Question 13, Madam Speaker.
£8 million has been awarded jointly to the universities of Glasgow and Paisley by the Scottish Higher Education Funding Council to develop higher education provision at the Crichton site. The first students will be admitted to courses in September of this year, with plans to have 500 places there by 2001-2002. From the 1st of July, this will be a matter for the Scottish Parliament.
Brown.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I'm grateful to my honourable friend for that reply, and I know that she fully appreciates the significance of the site as a future business terrace and as a university campus. Can the Minister confirm that it is a government priority that the new information technologies such as the National Grid for Learning will be embraced to provide educational opportunity to rural communities in Scotland?
I can confirm that step by step we will be ensuring that the National Grid for Learning will be developed throughout Scotland. Already Scotland's higher education institutions are already linked up. We are moving also with the rapid development of the University of the Highlands and Islands, and together with the development of broadband information technology for the higher education sector, we are proceeding apace to introduce that to schools and further education institutions as well.
Taylor.
14, Madam Speaker.
The Scottish Parliament will be expected to publish an official record of its proceedings and a journal recording its decisions. These have been provided for it in its initial standing orders, as contained in the Scotland Act 1998, Transitory and Transitional Provisions, Standing Orders, and Parliamentary Publications Order 1999, which was laid on the 12th of April. Madam Speaker, I'm not sure that was the most exciting answer that I've ever given, and but I hope, as it may be my last in this capacity at least, that it has helped the honourable member.
Consider that the devolution business will end up as a costly and divisive shambles, and who obviously pray that we're wrong as the 1st of July comes along, could the Secretary of State tell us, first of all, what steps he believes should be taken to encourage cooperation between the two parliaments? Secondly, what will he be answerable for in the House of Commons? And thirdly, whether he sees any meaningful role for Scottish MPs in Westminster after devolution.
Can I say to the honourable member that, of course, there is a role for Scottish MPs at Westminster. The honourable gentleman may think that fiscal affairs, foreign affairs, macroeconomics, defence, all the labour law, all the things that preserve, in fact, the integrated and level playing field for business in this country are unimportant, but I don't. And Scottish MPs will be here to represent Scottish interests and their constituents' interests, as they are at the moment, over these very important fields. And if the honourable gentleman is concerned about a lack of cooperation, he and I have been shouting abuse at each other for something like 30 years, I suspect. And I'm sure that he will want to make sure that that level of admirable cooperation will continue in the future.
Thank you. Questions, Minister of State, Lord Chancellor's Department.
Well, the Speaker there, Betty Boothroyd, ending today's shouting of abuse, otherwise known as Scottish Questions. Brian, as we discussed earlier, it didn't take John Swinney very long to get in the alleged deal between the Lib Dems and Labour.
No, standing all by himself, all on his lonesome on the bench usually occupied by himself and his SNP colleagues. He raised this point and got a fairly dusty answer from Henry McLeish, and of course in the bygoing got a bit of taunting from the Labour MPs about the absence of nationalists. I guess they can live with that, since they're no doubt campaigning vigorously up and down Scotland with the very intention of getting themselves away from Westminster full time.
And talking of campaigning, the award, I suppose, for interweaving an election slogan into a question went to Rachel Suarez.
Wasn't that umptuous in the extreme? Just mentioning the word step by step, which is Labour's slogan in the campaign. They say that is sort of the badge of caution. They say that they're doing things step by step, they're doing things slowly. A sort of Pavlovian reaction from all the Labour MPs cheering at the very mention of that phrase. Indeed, it came up later in a further question. It was part of the pantomime of the thing, of course, that while they were ostensibly answering questions on behalf of the Secretary of State's department, all the thoughts were about the new Parliament due to be elected next week.
And on a more serious note, perhaps, a direct hit by Liam Fox on tuition fees.
That's a good little question, yes. What did Tony Blair mean when he said the Labour government had no plans, or the Labour Party had no plans to introduce tuition fees? In response, Helen Liddle just sort of swept that aside and gave what has to be said was an extremely feisty and well-constructed answer, contriving to go from actually a pretty good hit by the Tories, turning it into an attack upon them and upon the SNP. The Tories, of course, this afternoon publishing their proposals for abolishing tuition fees in Scotland. Helen Liddle, dare one say it, perhaps a Secretary of State in the making, the Scottish Secretary who might carry on that role at Westminster in whatever role the Secretary of State ends up with, because of course that was a key theme of this question session as well. What will be left for Scottish business at Westminster?
And very briefly, what happens to Scottish Questions after July 1?
They have yet to decide in detailed terms. In my view, the thing will wither away, because I think the whole business of the involvement of Scotland in some senses at Westminster will be a different perspective. Wasn't it a charming symmetry that it was Sir Teddy Taylor, the great doughty fighter against devolution, who asked perhaps the last question of Donald Dewar as Secretary of State?
We'll never see its like again. For the moment, Brian, thank you. Well, we can go over live now to the green outside the Palace of Westminster, where David Porter is joined by MPs who've taken part in today's proceedings. David.
Well, Jackie, being a very nice afternoon here at Westminster, I've had no problems in tempting some of those who've just been taking part in Scottish Questions to come out and join me this afternoon. And with me I've got Rosemary McKenna from the Labour Party, Oliver Letwin from the Conservatives, John Swinney from the SNP and Michael Moore from the Liberal Democrats. And we all know there's been a fair whiff of electioneering going on today. We'd expect that. But Michael Moore, let's sort this out first of all. John Swinney's question: is there a secret deal between Labour and the Scottish Liberal Democrats for what might happen post-May the 6th?
The Liberal Democrats have been fighting this entire campaign on our policies and our priorities. We want as many people as possible to vote Liberal Democrat, get as many Liberal Democrats into the Scottish Parliament, and as Donald Dewar said only the other day, May the 7th will look after itself. There is no deal. We are there fighting on our own agenda, and we're very confident about how things are going to go.
So no deals, not even any talk of deals?
We are out there fighting on our agenda on health, on education and jobs, while the other parties have been slugging it out, making it a highly personal campaign. We've focused on the priorities, what we think people want to concentrate on, raising the standard in our schools, our hospitals, and for jobs in Scotland.
So John Swinney, you've heard it there, no deals.
Well, I think the reports this morning are very interesting, illuminating about the attempts within the London establishment to carve up the Scottish Parliament. And what we want is to have a Scottish Parliament that takes its orders from the people of Scotland, from the decisions that arrived at on May the 6th, not take some orders from London at the behest of Tony Blair or any of the other UK party leaderships. This Parliament's about democracy in Scotland and delivering for the people of Scotland. That's what the SNP is all about.
Oliver Letwin, you must be feeling a bit left out, because it seems we haven't had the voting yet, but no one wants to form a pact with the Tories.
I have to say I can't think of anything I'd like to be left out of more than a Lab-Lib pact.
I don't know whether John Swinney is right or wrong, but it would be surprising if he's not right, because the Lib Dems, after all, decided to be Labour's lapdog in Westminster. Why not in Scotland too?
Rosemary Kenner, while we're talking about all-party fairness, what would Labour's attitude be if a possible deal with the Lib Dems?
There's no discussion about that till the 7th of May, after the 5th of May. We will win the campaign. We will win it on the policies that we are putting to the people. The policies that are made in Scotland, that's what this is about. It's about trying to identify Labour as being led by London. These policies were made in Scotland by Scots, for Scots. It's about Scottish democracy, and that's what we are taking to the people in Scotland.
Now, you mentioned about Scottish policies made in Scotland. One issue that came up, tuition fees. You got a bit of a kicking on that one, didn't you?
No, I don't think we did, because the tuition fees issue is about taking money to those people who need it, to get young, poor people into further and higher education, and that's what we're about. It's about widening access. So we're not taking a kicking on tuition fees. The people who are involved understand that, and young people understand that.
Very briefly, and Oliver Ledwin, if your party had to form a coalition on the issue of tuition fees, would you vote them down in the Scottish Parliament?
We're not in the business of forming coalitions with anyone. We'll use the powers the electorate gives us in Scotland to try to make sure the union's held together and there's some kind of sensible government. And just to respond to Rosemary, I think there is a case for tuition fees. We all understand that. The problem is the Prime Minister didn't make it. What he said before the election, 14 days before the election, was no tuition fees, and then suddenly, goodness me, there are tuition fees, and we're saying that's not fair politics.
John Swinney, would the SNP go against tuition fees?
Well, one of the interesting things, and one of the points that I was trying to get at in the Scottish questions today, was whether we're going to find the Scottish Parliament deciding on an issue-by-issue basis, as the Consultative Steering Group has provided the opportunity for us to do. Now, we've got 3 parties in Scotland that are determined to stop tuition fees. I hope the resolve of all 3 parties is very firm on stopping tuition fees to make sure that we restore free education within Scotland. It's desperately required.
But the only way that the SNP can fund it is by taking money from education.
Well, I'm afraid we must leave it there. We've run out of time. A little bit of history down here at Westminster today. Jackie, the last Scottish questions till the Scottish parliamentary elections. Back to you in the studio.
Thanks very much, David. And don't forget, cross-examination this evening at 10:55 on BBC One Scotland. Alex Salmond faces a grilling from his political opponents. But from us, for now, bye-bye.
Whose idea was it anyway to go from Pollock Shields to West Africa?
An exchange to Mali for the return of a new food.
Leef me doen en die.